My name is John Goldberg. We're doing a workshop here today called Direct Action Campaign for Open Records. I'm the legislative chair for the Adoption Forum in Philadelphia and for a group called the Delaware Valley Adoption Council, which is a lot of the licensed adoption agencies and some support groups in the Philadelphia area. A very progressive group, I was surprised to find out. And I coordinated the organizational participation in National Open My Records Day just a couple of weeks ago. And while I'm thinking about it, let me just mention to you that on the Adoption Forum table downstairs, there's like an album that has news clippings from all around the country from various National Open My Records Day events. It's very exciting to me to see all that stuff, so I want to encourage people to go take a look at it. And also, while I'm doing announcements, why don't I remember this one also? I just finished writing a manual about this whole subject. What we're going to be doing today is about a page. If you want to take a look at it and pass it along. And copies of those are for sale at that table downstairs. That's how I'm financing my trip, I hope. Yeah, I walk back if nobody buys the manual.
In the book room.
In the book room, right. And what we're going to be doing today is about, oh, he put it on my tie. What we're going to be doing today is about a page out of that manual. So just to let you know what, sort of a context here. So what I'm planning for us to do, and I'm hoping that this will work out for everybody, this is the agenda review. I'm doing the introduction now, and I'll do a little bit more of that. Ask people to introduce themselves. And what we're going to be focusing on today is the issue of strategy. How would a local group, how would a local group organize or plan a strategy for itself to get records open or for whatever other change it wanted to make? Because oftentimes, and I'll talk about this more later, oftentimes what any kind of group, I'm not just talking about adoption groups do, but any kind of group does, they see something wrong in society and they say, let's go have a demonstration, or let's go write letters, or in other words, they jump right from what's the problem to what's the tactic we're going to use, and they don't figure out a strategy in between of what would be, that will end them up with the information of what would be the most effective tactics to use. So that's how I want us to use our time today, if that's okay with everybody here. Does that seem like a useful way to spend the next couple of hours? Okay, and then I want to just take a few minutes at the end. I guess we're ending at 12:30. How are people's time? Are people able to stay until 12:30? Okay, welcome. Hi. There are agendas and sign-up sheets on the first 3 rows. So if you want either of those, they're up in the first 3 rows. Okay. Yeah, I'm encouraging you to move forward. Are you adopted? Uh-huh, yeah. Still in that guilt and shame, trying to stay in the back, out of sight. Okay, so at the end, just
Are you adopted?
Yeah, I was adopted. Oh, I forgot to say that.
You're in the front of the room.
That's true, that's true. I'm being the good adopting. Yeah. Okay, so just before the end, what I'd like us to do is take a few minutes to do an evaluation of this workshop, because that helps me do this kind of work better in the future. Okay, and I said I was going to do some more introduction. I talked about the subject. I want to talk for just a moment about, I guess this handles everything now, just one other thing I want to mention. We have about 4 hours of work to do. This yellow sheet here will take us about 4 hours to go through, and we have 2 hours to do it in. So, so what we need to do is move expeditiously. And this is going to be very participatory. Most of the information in this workshop is going to come from all of you. And so one thing, I want to point out something about group dynamics that's usually true, and I hope it will help us to move through this workshop in an efficient manner. This isn't a peace symbol, even though it might look like one. In most groups, what you usually find is one person who takes up about this much of the conversational space. Now, I don't know who that's going to be here, but usually that's the case. Then you have one other person who takes up about this much conversational space. And then like this much that's, taken up by 3 or 4 more if the group is about this size. And then everybody else has to fit into these tiny little slices. And finally, actually, you have a couple people who don't ever say a word. And it's not because these folks speak about, in other words, if you divided the pie evenly, these folks speak about as much as their allotted time if you divided it evenly. And what happens is these folks who are shy, I being one of those shy people know all about this, basically get crowded out by these two. And some folks don't ever say anything at all. And it's not because they don't have anything to say or that they don't have valuable opinions to add. It's just that these folks are always speaking first, speaking loudly, speaking long, interrupting other people, and then the rest of us don't get a chance to speak. So I want to encourage whoever are these two people here, and you may or may not know who you are, to try to fit yourself into this category right here. And I want to encourage these folks here, and you may or may not know who you are, to try to fit yourself more or less in this, take up about your allotted time and I don't want to, I was going to say I don't want to inhibit anybody, but the truth of the matter is I do want to inhibit these two people. And I want to uninhibit these folks here, because I want everybody to have a chance to be as much of a part of this process as possible. The one fear I have in saying this is that I'm afraid that some of these folks might think they're these folks and then not say anything at all, and I do want to encourage people to participate. Okay, is that enough introduction and we can start? Okay, so how about if we just go around and ask everybody to relatively briefly say who you are and where you're from and why you came to the workshop today, and maybe something about what's going on in your state or whatever you want to say. Do you want to start, Mary Jo?
Sure. I'm Mary Jo Jackson. I'm from a group called Adoption Triangle, which is in Park Forest, Illinois, which is south, about an hour south of here. I'm an adoptee, and I don't want to be the
Don't worry about it too much, folks.
That's all I have. That's basically all I
Okay.
had to say anyway. But.
Okay, great.
I'm Rhonda Shoemaker. I'm from Independence, Missouri. I'm a birth mom, and I'm here to learn, see what I can do in the world of adoption.
Great.
I'm Sue Martin, First Vice President of Truth Seekers Adoption in Chicago. And we have just had a very successful Law Day presentation with some help from John and his organizations. And we'd like to see what we're going to do next in the state of Illinois.
There's good coverage.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm John Bernstein, and I'm going to be a panelist really this afternoon on a related topic, and I really want to find out what everybody's going to say so I know what to say. I'm from Bloomington, Illinois.
Great.
Since he's married to me, he's a birth stepfather. And I'm birth mother. Reunited. Well, you're trying to figure out his title. So I think that would be it. 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And I guess here to learn.
Great.
My name's Doug Bernstein. I'm a birth half-brother, I guess you would say. And I'm also just learning for the first time, sort of educating myself on what's going on.
Great.
John Gager, I'm an adoptee, president of Adoption Identity Movement in Detroit.
I'm Donna Cullum, president and founder of Yesterday's Children, also a charter member of AAC, and was there in the beginning. And I'm an adoptee, and I searched and found, and I'm here to just enjoy what you have to say, John.
I'm Sue Sarah. I'm from Westerly, Rhode Island. I'm a member of PALM of Rhode Island. I searched and found, and I'm just here to learn more about legislation because Rhode Island's a very tight state, and I'd like to learn how to kind of get them out of the woods.
I'm Sarah Press. I'm an adoptee. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'm very active in the group we have down there, which is a branch of CUB. And I'm here to learn so that we have a lot happening in Ohio with some changes and some laws that are coming up. I'm just trying to learn and absorb and take things back so that we can do more.
Great.
I'm Dan Fargo. I'm an adoptee. I've been meeting with both my birth parents. I'm the president of the Adoption Circle of Hawaii. And we just successfully got legislation passed to open access to records, but there's a lot of things in the law that still need to be changed and modified. And so we bumbled into this one, and now I want to see how to do it.
Mary Hines, Concord, New Hampshire, birth mother, searching, and I'm just interested in anything I can learn about opening records.
Great.
I'm Faith Salzberg. I'm an attorney who's at the Office of the Public Guardian here in Cook County. And I handle the termination of parental rights calendar, and I'm the legislative liaison for the office.
In Kate Burke's opening remarks this morning, she talked about us needing to go out there and kick some ass. And we really kicked ass on May 1st. And there's a lot of people here who were involved in that effort. Who was involved in the May 1st action? So 1, 2, 3. And we would have had another one if you hadn't had your legislation passed, right?
We decided it would not be
Right.
real good.
Yeah.
Demonstrate.
Right. And what I want to say is that Palm was, I think, the last one that we found out about, but you got an action together, I think it was at the last minute, and did, yeah, and did something out there. That's great. Detroit had the largest number of people. There were over 100 people, and you got like all the local stations, right?
All the local stations, and
Right.
we're still doing media from it.
Uh-huh.
We are still 2
Uh-huh.
weeks later doing
Yeah. And Sue was one of the coordinators, the PR coordinator, right, for the Chicago area. And you got all the local stations and cable news network, right, and the Chicago Sun-Times and the Chicago Tribune. I mean, you know, basically, if you were in the United States on that day, you had something approaching a 50-50 chance of having heard about the fact that all these people want these records open. So, I mean, to me, that's a very important step in this whole process. Okay, and I just want to reflect a little bit about Ken Watson's talk, and I was going to call this, you know, direct action campaign for open records, but of course there are lots of other issues. So let's just say it's a direct action campaign for adoption profits to win over politicians. So that's what we're going to be working on today. Okay, so what I want to do is start with this chart. I really am going to trip on this, I can tell. That's how I want to spend the next hour and something, is on this chart. And also I want to say where it comes from. It comes from a group called the Midwest Academy, which is right here in Chicago. Do you know about them, by the way? No. They do all the training for a group called Citizen Action, which is the largest progressive membership organization in the country. Pardon me? You know them? You know that group? But they're effective, right? Right. So this is the tactic. So if you want to learn how to fight back against Citizen Action, here's how they do it. They've done incredible work around the country around toxics, insurance rates. What have they made you mad about?
I happen to be Assistant General Counsel of State Farm.
Oh, insurance, right. Yeah, I imagine you'd be pretty mad. Yeah, they do incredible work around the country around those kinds of issues.
Fortunately, they don't tell the truth.
Well, that'll be something that we'll veer from. I think it's important for us to be telling the truth in what we do. Okay, so what I want to do is go over, oh, and by the way, let me just mention one other thing at the risk of making John mad.
Would you like me to take him out?
No, it's fine. It's fine. Midwest Academy does 5-day trainings all over the country every year in different parts of the country. And I strongly encourage people to go. It's the most powerful short-term training. I mean, I've been involved in this kind of stuff for 20 years, and to me it's the most powerful short-term training I've ever seen. And this chart, I think, is the single most powerful training tool I've seen. They spent about 4 hours on this in that workshop. It's just tremendous stuff. Okay, so what I want to do is go over just briefly what's in it and then start from the beginning. So the first thing they say is you have to have a clear vision of what you want to do. Know what your objectives are. Know what your goals are. And then you need to take care of, or you need to pay attention to what your organizational considerations are. You know, what resources do you have? What ways do you want your group to grow and stuff like that? And then who are your constituencies? Who are your members? Who might be your members? And who are your allies? And Ken talked about that a lot this morning. It's very important to be able to reach out to more and more allies all the time. And then who are your targets? And they're not always politicians. In some cases, they might be insurance companies or chemical companies, or who knows who they might be, right? But basically, you need to figure out, and in fact, something I want to point out here, and we'll go into this more later, is that what they define as a target actually is never the legislature or a company or an agency. It's a person. Has it been you, John, ever? you specifically. I'm sorry to hear it. So actually, you know what? You could make a very valuable contribution to this workshop by talking about how some of this strategy and tactics affects the individual who's on the receiving end or the targeted end, especially when we get to the target and tactics part. And then the last thing is, and there's some other kinds of targets there that I'll talk about as well. And then the last thing is tactics. Once you figure out what are your goals, what things you need to know about your organization and new people you want to bring in and who your targets are, then you can figure out what the most effective tactics are going to be to reach those goals. So that's the overview. Let's just check and see if there's any questions or comments now before we get into all of these details. Anything? Don't be afraid, really. You can say something. Even this person can say something here today. I did a chart about how often people speak in groups, and we're trying to equalize things here. So, anybody? Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. So I want to start with the first one, goals, objectives. What's the last thing on there? Vision. And the first question they ask us is, what are the long-range goals of your organization? Now say again, which states are people here from? Just say the state.
Illinois.
Illinois.
Michigan.
New Hampshire.
Hawaii.
Ohio. Rhode Island.
Oh, great. Okay, what if we use, how would it be if we used Illinois as the example here? Okay, and you can think of it in your own state's terms, but since the fact that close to half of the folks here are from Illinois, I think we might be able to think better if we had a local example that we could work with. Is that all right? Okay. So, and you can say stuff even if it's not about Illinois. You can say what your goals are and stuff, but it'll help me, I think, and maybe help us if we think in those terms. So, what are the long-range objectives of your organization? I assume we're talking about an adoption, search, support, reform type organization. What are your long-range objectives? Any more?
Education.
Could you say more about what you mean by that? Oh, and let me, before you do, let me just mention, what I'm asking us to do here is a brainstorm, and what I want to propose as a format for that is that everybody just sort of throws out the ideas, and it's not a place where we need to like say, oh no, I don't believe that, or I don't agree with that. You can just say whatever you think about your own idea too, instead of like criticizing somebody else's, because it helps us just put them all out there. Though if one is not clear what exactly we mean by it, it's fine to ask a question. I don't understand what that is. Could you say more about it? So whoever said education, could you say a little more about it?
Well, I think that a lot of people are not aware of the fact that records aren't even open.
Uh-huh.
There has to be an awareness of what the problem is, and then so that you can tell them what you think the solution should be.
Mm-hmm.
Also, by educating these social workers, you're giving them knowledge as to what we think, because those of us that were adopted in the 30s and 40s really didn't begin to state what we thought until maybe the last 20 years.
Okay.
I think you're also dealing with both attitudinal and behavioral change is what we're looking for.
Uh-huh. So is that, you're talking about that's another goal here? Another goal?
Education as well.
Uh-huh.
I think that you can use it more generically. Because in opening records, we're asking for change in attitude and enhance the behaviors of the government.
Okay, any other long-range goals?
Well, I think at least our organization, which represents children,
Mm-hmm.
we're trying to move towards open adoption.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, any more?
And supporting all that stuff, and creating having the mechanisms to support it.
Supporting all of this stuff, okay. Welcome, if you...
I'm looking for Sue.
Martin?
Martin.
You found her. Okay, any more goals? Yeah.
To see agencies work together with support groups to try to reach common goals.
Okay, so that's agencies and groups working together. Any more? Okay, let me add one. Family preservation, trying to help birth families stay together in the first place. Any more? Okay. On that note, let me just pass this around. There's a little booklet about this subject, and anybody who's interested, after you look through it, you can get it by just sending a self-addressed mailing label to this foundation. So let me just pass that around for folks. Okay, so these are our long-range goals.
Can I mention something also? In
Sure.
And that's the trustee Mossback. The closed adoption is often justified on the theory of family preservation from the adoptee and adoptive families.
Right.
So maybe a goal, a legitimate goal ought to be to just improve the health of the adoption process.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You have to alleviate fears. And there's so many fears within the adoption process.
Okay, so we want to take out the fears. We want to, what was your thing? Improve the adoption.
The adoption process, family ties, family stability of the adoptive
Okay, and actually that made me think of another one, which is it seems to me that it would be good if we improve the adoption process itself. I mean, there are a lot of, all this stuff about baby brokering and all that kind of stuff. Definitely we need to, so we need to improve the process. Okay, so all of that being the case, then how about, let's pick one of these to focus on for our, hour and something here. Which one of these do we want to use as a case study for the next hour or so of these various issues or goals, these goals? Open records? How's that for other people? Should we spend our time on that? Okay. Okay, so for open records as the goal, okay, what would be the long-range goal in a campaign for open records? How would you know if you got it?
Well, if you're asking for long-range goals, then what we're asking for is complete and open access to birth records for all members of the tribe.
From any particular age or from birth? From adulthood or birth or? See, this is very interesting.
For an adulthood, for the moment being, age 18.
Adult access. Okay, and actually it's a question that we wrestled with in the Adoption Forum in Philadelphia. It's like, what records are going to be open to who, when? In other words, you got the original birth certificate and the amended birth certificate and the adoption decree and the subjective comments of the social worker and the this and the that. And then you got, the adoptee and the birth parent and the adoptive parent, and should they get it from the beginning, or should they only get it when the person is an adult, or are there other circumstances? You know what I mean? It's like, I think groups need, it's valuable, I think, for groups to go through a process and decide, which thing do they think? Should all these records be open to the general public? Like are other birth records open to the general public? And should these be? See, those are questions I think would be valuable for us to wrestle with in our own groups. Okay, but for the moment, how would people feel if what we said was that we want complete access to all of the records by all of the parties, all of the triad parties, once the adoptee becomes an adult? Would that be a good enough statement for our issue for this next hour or so?
I think you need to put the word emancipated rather than adult, because some states think at 21 you are, others think at 18, there's one apparently at 14. So emancipation, when the state considers you emancipated, meaning free from your parents' obligations.
So in other words, it's whenever the state decides that you're old enough to be responsible for yourself. It might be 14 or 18 or 21.
Not the state decides, but it's just the law that is at such age you can drink, at such age you can drive.
Right.
Every state
Everybody
has one.
Yeah.
Has an age.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and that's when they consider you to be an adult legally, right?
Well, that's why I thought emancipated would be a good.
Okay, so but are we clear then on what our goal is for this time period? Okay. Okie doke. So how would you know if you got victory? How would you know if you won?
the laws were changed in order to accommodate.
Pardon me?
And the courts upheld it.
Yeah, that's a good one.
See, it is tricky, isn't it? I mean, it's not necessarily a simple thing. Okay, and then now let's take the Hawaii example. Could you say briefly what you just won in Hawaii, and whether you think that's open records or not?
Yeah, what we won was less than what we wanted, so our long-term goals were not met to
Uh-huh.
victory.
Okay.
Our short-term goals were, and then that we got some legal change.
Mhm.
Essentially, what we went in asking for was complete access at the age of the adoptee's age of 18
Mhm.
for all three members of the adoption trial
Mhm.
to that information. What we got was a system which has an intermediary process which, when a requesting adoptee or birth parent requests the information, it's turned over to family courts. They send a letter out to the last known address, which can include letters and pictures from the requesting party sent to this party. Their issue in our state was they wanted to protect confidentiality of birth parents.
Mhm.
If they get no response, which they probably won't because these addresses are at least 18 years old,
Mhm.
it's turned over to an agency who performs a 4-month diligent search. If at the end of 4 months, they cannot find the people, the records are open.
Mhm.
If they do find them, they're
Mhm.
offered them the choices of confidentiality.
So, after a period of 6 months, if the person wasn't found, found, wait a minute,
Correct.
unless the person was found and said no, right?
You're either going to get open records or contact.
But if they were found and said no, then you don't.
Right, for 10 years, that confidentiality is maintained.
Uh-huh.
Then it has to be renewed by that party, but they
Uh-huh.
can change their mind at any time.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. So, but that's not. But you're saying that no. But how many people would be happy with that in your own state? If after 6 months, unless the person was found and said no, you got contact or the records, would you be happy with that in your state? Would you be
As
happy
the
with that
final
in
conclusion.
Illinois? Yeah.
Or as
Sure,
the
much
beginning.
better than presently.
And would you,
beginning, yeah.
and would you, as a
No,
beginning,
not
but
at- yeah, as a
would you
beginning.
feel like that was the victory, that you got open records?
No.
No.
It's not what we asked for.
Right.
But
Right.
But it's a short-term victory.
Uh-huh.
Now we have to,
Right.
you're asking us
Mm-hmm.
if in fact the long-term goal which we
Right.
established was
Right.
complete open records. That's not.
Mm-hmm. See, now in some states they might say, oh, that's terrific, that's all we'll ever need, that's fine. And in other states they might say, well, yeah, that's a nice first step, but we want more.
Well, at the danger of being a number one, I'm going to talk about. Politics, as was said earlier, is the art of the possible. And what you have to take is one step at a
Mhm,
time.
mhm.
I submit that coming from a situation of sealed records up till 5-10 years
Mhm.
ago, and then having maybe 50, 20, 25 states say, okay, we're going to have some kind of limited information.
Mhm.
And then go to the Hawaii thing. I think that's a very
Mhm.
reasonable step, and I think you can regard it as a victory. And what the heck, so next year or the year after, then you start for the next step.
Right, absolutely. And the question I'm asking though is is it the long-range victory? And for Hawaii, it's not. For some other state, it might be. Another state might say, oh, that's fine. All I'm saying is that we need to know what victory is. It's like we need to know if we're done yet and we can go on to some other issue, or if we still have more that we need to do on that. And it's good for a group to decide in advance what it will ultimately accept as victory. Yeah.
Part of the process that we had in Michigan and that we have had is that for a number of years we've tried to change small parts of the adoption code. Unfortunately, by doing that, the general public did not understand what we wanted.
Uh-huh.
So we have decided it's time to start asking for open records and not just falling back on, well, we'll take this or we'll take this little bit. The goal is to educate. We also want open records, but we can't have open records without the general public understanding what we want. So we have to clearly ask for what we want. That might not be as successful as saying, okay, well, we'll fall back on just some small change in the code. So it's kind of a mix of saying, you know, we're going to hold to what we want and make it real clear to everybody that this is what we want, or we're going to decide to say, okay, well, we'll fall back a little bit, and people will think that we got what we want when we really didn't. So I'm not sure what's right or wrong about that.
Well, I think that what you have to do is say, this is what we want. We will work to get that, to that end. And then if you were offered a slice of bread rather than the whole loaf, you take it because it is a beginning. And it becomes very counterproductive. And this happened in Illinois when we almost had a bill to have open records 10 years ago. And a group that will remain nameless really botched it up because they said, no, we won't accept any meetings. And we said, do anything, just get something moving. And now we're further behind than we've ever been. So, you know, I think you've got to be careful not to be counterproductive in your movement.
I agree.
And that's the other thing, is that it would be very valuable if all of the groups in the same state, and I'm assuming here that we're talking about changing state laws, that all of the groups in the same state come to a common agreement about what their goals are, what their strategy is, what their tactics are. And let me just say that I find that to be a terrible problem in this movement, that groups all over the country and even in the same towns don't cooperate. They either fight or they ignore each other, and it really gets in our way.
We're very new to this. Our first convention was in Indianapolis in the fall, and that is the first thing we noticed.
Oh, yeah, it's terrible.
They get very proprietary.
Right, right.
Even in our group in Hawaii, when we first went into this process, our board of directors sat down and said, we won't accept anything less than complete, total, utter victory. And when it came time for them, when our legislators turned around and said, here's the slice of bread we'll give you, we went back to all of the people in our group who will be affected by that law, because most of us who are involved have already been with them. And every one of them said, we want this law, we want peace.
Right.
The legislators said to us, we're going to take a conservative approach, and when you get some data about Hawaii, then let's talk.
Yeah, and actually that gets us down to the bottom of that first column, number 3, which is what short-term or partial victories will you accept as steps? Because people get burned out. People need to feel some concrete improvements in their lives as they go along. They can't just wait and hope and work for the ultimate goal someday and never get any benefits along the way. We need to get those steps, whatever they might be along the way. So that's 3 of the criteria that they suggest that we look at in evaluating what is a victory. First of all, does it give concrete improvements in people's lives? And that's very important to make sure is there. I mean, in other words, if there was some policy statement, if what you won was some policy statement that, that adoption ought to be more open than it is, that the legislature passed some resolution or something, well, that wouldn't give anybody any concrete improvements in their lives. In this Hawaii law, they get some concrete improvements. They either get an answer, or they get something. Okay? The other thing is that they suggest that it's very important that people in the process of doing this kind of campaigning get more and more of a sense of their own power. Because especially for people who, well, that's what this stuff is all about, is for people who've been disempowered for one reason or another. I mean, in the civil rights movement, it was all about, giving black people more power, standing up for themselves, feeling like they were full human beings, right? In the women's movement, in every kind of movement, that's what it's about, is taking more and more power and feeling that. And then finally, altering the relations of power. In other words, when you get a law changed and it's upheld in the courts, you've now altered the relations of power, because it's not just your opinion versus your opposition's opinion anymore. The law is different, and you have the law on your side now. Right now, we have the law against us in all but 2 or 2.5 states, if you count Hawaii. But if we change the law for open records, then the law is on our side, and we've changed the relationship of power between us and whoever that opposition might be. We'll talk about them a while later. Okay, so that's the end of this first thing about vision, objectives, and goals. So let's see if there's any other questions or comments about that. Okay, let me just ask, let's do just a little process check here. And let me just ask, how many people do we have in this group now who, for this workshop so far, are in this category here and haven't said anything at all or have hardly said anything? Just raise your hand if you haven't said anything at all or you've hardly said anything. Raise them up high.
No.
1, 2, 3, any more? Okay, I just want to encourage you folks to share your opinions and speak up. And you're not required to. I just want to encourage you to do that. And anybody else who's in these little thin boxes here, I just want to encourage you to get in the fray. Okay.
At the end of the session,
Pardon me?
Let's say, now raise your hands,
Who didn't speak. Okay, so the next one is organizational considerations. Oops. Oh, and the first one is resources. Do you have the right newsprint, and is it going to work for you? And all that kind of stuff. Okay. Okay, so the first thing is to take a look at what resources you have as a group. Because if you're a group with 4 members and $50 in the bank and nobody ever heard of you, and you want to change the law in Michigan, in Illinois or any other major state, that's, it's a little hard to do. And then on the other hand, if you've got, let me just tell you the case in what happened in Montreal. They had 11, the group up there, Mouvement Retrouvailles, they had 11,000 members. They could get 4,000 people out in the street for a demonstration. They won open records. I mean, they should have, but I mean, I'm not saying what they should have done, but in a certain sense, they should have decided that their goal wasn't just measly old little open records. It's, it's like changing the entire adoption system in the Quebec province, right? They probably had the power to do that. And what happened to them, and I'm not critical of them at all, I mean, they won open records, and my group hasn't done that yet in Pennsylvania. They got the records open, and then all the activists got their records, and then the legislature closed the records again. And by then, all the activists were all happy and dispersed and satisfied, and there wasn't anybody around to fight anymore. So that's another reason why it's important to have more issues, because if you need to just keep building the group and pushing more and more issues, because that way you can't backslide as easy. If they turn around and they want to cut you out from behind, you still got your 11,000 people. They ended up with like hundreds because everybody had their records, and they have to now sort of start over again.
Pennsylvania have some birth records open for a short period of time and then turn around and reverse and close them?
Yeah, there was a loophole in the law for a period of time, and it's just because it was like a sunset law and the legislature didn't notice it. And then in 1984, the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference decided that it was time for the legislature to close the records.
That's kind of like the loophole in the Ohio law.
That's right.
They realized it and wrote another bill that went into law for people who were born and adopted after January 1st, 1964. People before then found out the back door to get in and attain the records, and then they shut them as of January 1st, 1964.
Right. Yeah, similar thing happened in Pennsylvania. So let's take a look at organizational considerations. What of the groups that you belong to in Illinois and in other states, what kind of resources do you have? How much money does let's say money, how much money, what's the budget for various groups here? Total amount of money that you have for your group.
My checkbook and in hand, essentially.
Your own personal checkbook. Okay.
It's a small group with small income.
Okay.
And we're running at about a negative 180, not $1.80, about a negative 180, and that's my checkbook. My own checkbook.
Oh, you mean at the moment, you mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Our resources are small.
Huh?
Our organization operated on about $1,000 in personal money and about $1,500 in dues.
So that's $2,500. So we got one with minus 180, another one with $2,500. Anybody else know about what you're?
We've been in existence 15 years, and we've got a lot of publicity because we filed the first lawsuit. Patrick Murphy, by the way, was our attorney. We lost, but yeah, we raised well over $100,000. But we used our donations and our funding, membership funds for anything that costs money. So we don't have that much in the bank now.
Okay, so we have
a lot of money.
Yeah, so we have a wide range of financial resources dependent on the group, and based on the amount of money you have, that's going to help determine how much what issue you can tackle, what the nature of the campaign is going to need to be. I mean, if you weren't doing litigation, if you were doing, like a lobbying campaign.
Well, we did that too.
Okay,
So it
okay.
funded all that.
Oh, okay.
Is that Roger B?
Roger Barth, yeah. Yeah.
So if you got $100,000, you can do a big campaign. I mean, you can buy media, you can rent buses, you can do all kinds of stuff. See, but if you got a minus $180, you got to raise money. Or even if you just got $300 or $1,000 or something, you may have to raise. You have to match those two up.
Or don't you think also you can get the personal commitment of each one of your members to come forward and pay their own expenses when they lobby? You know, that's what cost us a lot of money.
Right, yeah.
If people would have said, okay, I'll donate $100 to help pay for the hotel room and my food.
Right. Plus you have in-kind donations,
Yeah.
hotel rooms and
Right.
food and all kinds of other stuff. That's a part, you know, it's a part of your financial resources.
And the other thing is possibly coalitions in like Michigan, get all the groups to put some of their resources together.
Right.
For the common goal.
So yeah, you can bring in other groups to put in money or copying expenses or telephone bills or whatever. Okay, now how about staff? How many groups have staff? Okay, how much of a staff do you have?
It ranges anywhere from as few as 10 on up to 25.
Now you
All
talk.
volunteer.
Oh, okay, no, I'm talking about right now, okay, let's do volunteers. How many people have, how many people, yeah, how many people have volunteers who work for your groups? Okay, how many volunteers do you have? 15 to 20. How many do you have? 10 to 20?
10 to 25.
10 to 25, 8, 5 or 6. In the adoption forum, I would say we have maybe 10. Okay, now how about paid?
1.5.
1.5 volunteers? Volunteers?
Yeah, me and half of another person.
Okay. Okay, so how many staff, now let's talk about how many staff. Anybody here have paid staff? Okay, the adoption forum has one quarter-time person.
0.25.
Yeah, okay, so there, and everybody else has got 0. So that's, you know, that's another consideration to watch.
At one point, we did pay. You know, when we had so much mail, we didn't know what to do with it. We
Uh-huh.
paid like $3 an hour.
Right.
But that was.
And you had
for
a
year.
full-time person or
Yeah,
half-time?
we had several. Anybody that came in and worked, we'd give them $3 an hour to answer the mail.
So you had several
5 people did that.
part-time
Right,
people.
period, for about a year, but then we just had additional
Uh-huh.
volunteer that
So was it equivalent to about 1 full-time person, do you think?
I would suspect that.
Okay, so or maybe 1. Okay, so we're talking about relatively small staffs, you know, volunteer numbers and the relatively low numbers. I mean, compared to big organizations that have hundreds or thousands of volunteers, right? And a big range of money. Okay, and how about facilities? How many groups have an office? Adoption forum, this one, your group does. Okay, so we got a few offices. And how about reputation? Do people know about your group? Does the public know about you or the adoption community, the agencies and stuff? Those are considerations as well. If nobody's ever heard of you, you're going to have to get some name recognition, right? And if everybody knows your name, don't bother with that, then you can move on to the campaign. But I'm just taking a look at the various aspects of resources. Okay, and then the next thing that I think is valuable is to work out a budget for the specific campaign that you're working on. Now, what most groups do, I think, is they just sort of go along, you know, like, oh yeah, well, we got some more membership fees in, and now we have some more bills, and we're going to pay them. But is State Farm? It's a big, successful organization, right? They got a budget, right? I mean, it helps them plan to be a successful and to continue to be a successful organization and get done what they want to get done, including whatever their political agenda is, right? There's a budget for lobbying, right, and litigation and stuff like that. So if we do that, we can be more effective. No criticism here, but is there any group here who has a budget for your issue work, that you've worked out a budget for your issue work?
We brought Kate Burke in
Uh-huh.
and, you know, paid for a hotel room for a day or
Right,
two. but-
right. Okay, so you got a budget. How
We
much?
didn't have the money, but we tried to budget it.
Okay, about how much did you budget for that campaign?
Well, we did.
No, I'm sorry, I was asking, because he was just talking about he had a budget.
Essentially, what we budgeted was around $2,000.
Okay, and you have a budget for lobbying?
Yeah, we normally spend about $5,000 per session when we do it.
Okay, 5K. And let me just share with the rest of you, the Adoption Forum in Philadelphia, we do not have a budget for that purpose. We just go like, you know, like I said, money comes in, we pay the bills, and that's it. And we would be good if we developed a budget. I think we'd be more effective. Okay, so now the next thing I want to point out is how, in terms of organizational considerations, is how your group can be strengthened by being involved in some sort of a campaign. And this has to do with, would somebody just read out what is on the sheet there? Underneath number 2 in the second column.
Like expand leadership?
Yeah. Would you just read what the list is?
Expand leadership, increase experience with current leaders, build membership, raise more money.
Okay, leader experience, members. Is that it? There was 4? There's 4? Okay. Okay, so why did I put this number? Just got off of budgets. Okay, so how many active leaders would you say are in your organization right now? 3? Okay, so you got 3 now. In the adoption forum, I'd say we have about, probably about 10, maybe. About 10. Anybody else have a?
There's probably 5 that we allow to be spokespersons.
Are,
Terrible allowed.
no, but are they? No, but I'm not asking about spokespersons. They might be leaders in some other way.
That they lead in the movement, in our.
Yeah, how many people in your group are actively involved in the leadership of the group in some way? About 5. Okay. Any more? Any other groups? One thing you can do by a campaign of some sort, let's say a campaign to open the records, is you can set it up in such a way that you bring more people into the leadership of the organization. You develop more leaders. The people who are now leaders who have certain skills can then impart those skills to new or potential leaders in the process of the campaign. So you can set a goal. If you got 3 leaders now, you could say, we want 6, or we want 10, or we want 4, right? If you got 10, you could say, we want 12, or we want 20, or we want 30. A realistic goal, but your organization will probably be more effective if you have more, more good, solid, experienced leaders. Now that brings us to the next question: is the kinds of experience they have, and you can ask yourself, this can be the amount of time. Like we've got some people who have been leaders for a year, and we're going to do this other year campaign, and they're going to have 2 years of experience, or maybe they put in 50 hours and they can put in another 200 hours in the next year, and then they'll have that much more experience. Or it can have to do with skills. Like these 5 people know how to be spokespeople, but here's 2 more who we could probably train to be effective public speakers and speak on our behalf. Or here's 3 people who know how to be good lobbyists and organize people to go to the Capitol and stuff, and we could probably get 2 more to learn how to do that. Or here's 2 people who know how to make flyers, and they could share that information with 6 more, and then we could have 8 people who could make flyers. So those kinds of things. And then the number of memberships. So let me ask, how many members do groups have? How many members?
We have 125.
125. Anybody else?
Well, keeping in mind that we've been in existence for 15 years, over the years, we've got well over 50,000 people that have contacted us, and we split our membership in 3 ways. So of those 50,000, maybe only 20 are in one category and 10 are in another, and that type of thing.
How about current members?
Well, we never...
You don't have any dues, annual dues?
We tell them they're
or
supposed to pay us every year, but we don't give them out. We just keep them.
Okay.
Because we don't think that's nice.
Okay, so in a certain sense, you have 50,000 members. Now, how
Well, in a
about...
real sense.
Uh-huh.
That's what
Right,
the membership
right,
is.
okay. Do you have any notion of just people who have paid you in the last year? Do you have any notion of what that might be?
Yeah, but I wouldn't give it.
Oh, okay, well,
I don't because of the state. I don't think it's in their business.
okay.
Excuse me, would you include me as a member if I sent you $5 in 1977?
Oh, you bet, you bet.
I'm a member.
You bet, you bet.
Okay,
I'm glad
well,
to know you still exist.
yeah, I know, well...
We never take anybody off our list because I think that's awful to do that.
Okay, well, just to give you an example, the group I work for, by the way, is called United Neighbors Against Drugs. It's an street corner anti-drug group. We push the drug dealers off the corners and seal up drug houses and stuff like that. And we consider anybody a member who has come to 3 or more of our events. That's our criteria for membership. So we don't ever say, well, this person isn't a member anymore. I mean, we got a guy who moved to South America and another one who moved to Boston, and as far as we're concerned, they're life members of United Neighbors Against Drugs. Yeah. Okay, anybody else who has a number of members that you can say from your group?
300.
300. Okay, and Adoption Forum in Philadelphia, we probably have about 200 people who've given us money in the last year, so we consider them to be active members. Okay, and then when we talked about what our financial situations were as organizations, how much money we have, and that's the other thing we can do is in the process of the campaign, because was it you that was saying, Dan, about that you can get money by bringing in other groups, or was it John? It seemed like it was somebody right in the middle here who was talking about that. Get other groups in and they would give money. They might give money to the campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
I'm talking about other search and support groups.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Or any whatever kind of group.
What we did is we called it like Adoption Rights Movement of Michigan.
Uh-huh.
And there's no real structure to it,
Mhm.
but maybe just group leaders up around Michigan that kind of get together and
Right.
focus that energy.
Right. Yeah. So that's, yeah, in the process of a campaign, you can plan to bring in more money in various ways. One of them is by bringing in more groups who are going to contribute money. If you're doing more activist stuff, there may be foundations or corporations or individuals who might want to give you, more funding, and for that reason. If you get more members, then you can get more dues. If you get people who are more skilled at, like if they're more skilled at fundraising, they can do more asking, or they can write a better mail appeal, or whatever it is. So there's ways that you can plan in the process of a campaign. It doesn't have to deplete your finances, but you can actually increase them. And you can plan for that. You can figure out what's our goal, how are we going to meet it, what's our fundraising plan, all that kind of stuff.
Could I ask a question?
Mhm.
I want to go back to that membership again, because I guess it bothers me. Like you said, you had 200 in Adoption Forum, is that it? But obviously you've had more members than that. So why do you not release that full number? Because I think it's not good PR to say, well, we only had 200 this year. I think since from the beginning, what is your membership? And as long as you don't kick them out, they really are members.
Yeah, and actually,
Why wouldn't you put a bigger number?
Yeah.
Because it could be more alarming to the opposition.
Yeah, and actually what we do is, we've got it on computer now, and we don't actually take somebody off the list. We just write inactive under their dues
Oh,
section.
you make them inactive?
Yeah, we call them inactive, but so they're still really members.
Yeah.
So like if you do a mailing, you mail out 50,000?
It depends upon what the mailing is. Like when we did our study, it cost us a fortune that I presented in New York last year. I mean, we put out like something like $7,000, and we mailed a lot. Now what happens is you find that as maybe an address will change, so we were getting a lot back. But we don't send out newspapers anymore because it's simply it's not cost effective for us to do it. We rather channel our money into lobbying and lawsuits. That's where our focus is. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to the question of internal problems. Every group has internal problems, and of every kind, right? And the question is, can you address those problems and can you solve them? Because the degree to which you can do that is the degree to which you can move ahead on whatever your external agenda is. So let's just list what are some of the internal problems that are common to our groups. What kind of problems we have?
Personality.
Personality.
Too many groups.
Well, it's an internal problem to the movement. If there's lots of, it might be a good thing, and on the other hand, it might be a bad thing. But there are certainly a downside to it. So we got too many groups.
Concentrate in certain areas. I mean, a lot of groups in a big metropolitan area or even Cincinnati.
Dropouts. Essentially, people who finish the search, and once they finish their search, they're not interested anymore.
Right.
They got what they wanted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which seems to be the majority of people.
An interesting thing that all of our board members, of which we have about 9 board members, are finding that when we get into emotional issues, that our roles as members of the triad start to become how we interact with each other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And sort of related to this stuff, there's like ego stuff and power stuff and all kinds of. Okay, well, those are some common problems, right? And all I want to say about this is that it's very valuable to recognize what those problems are and to deal with them in an effective and usually as forthright a manner as possible. Because if you just sort of let them go on, right, they just keep getting in your way. I said this before, and I saw lots of people nodding and saying yes, that it's a big problem in the movement as a whole. It might be more of a problem in the movement as a whole than it is inside of any particular groups. But there just seems to be all this infighting and all this kind of stuff that really, I mean, it gets in our way. And it's a problem that I think we as a movement are going to need to address if we're going to be as effective as we can be. There are some exceptions to that. You know, it may well be that the groups in Michigan, for example, get along really well, and that's wonderful. In some other places, groups don't talk to each other, or they fight, or they call each other names, or they sue each other in court. I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, that should be all directed at the opposition, right, not at our allies. Okay, so let's just ask if there's any questions or comments about any of the stuff we've talked about in organizational considerations before we move on. Okay. So the next one is constituencies, which fall out into two different categories, one of which is members, and the other one is allies. So let's just talk about members for a minute, and I want to define members as basically the people who the problem that you're working on, the issue that you're working on, it affects them directly. They have a personal stake in it. So who would our members likely be, and potential members? Triad members. Anybody else? Professionals.
These guys have gotten a lot larger. It's no longer the agency. We have a psychiatric community, a psychological community who are now having to deal with all of us post-adoption, adoptees.
Okay. Anybody else that this affects?
Families of triad members.
Families. And did somebody else say something that I missed?
They're saying significant others.
Oh,
that
right.
are tried that are affected.
Right, our spouses and significant others
Right.
who don't really give a
Right.
shit.
So all kinds of family members. All kinds of family members, right? All kinds of family members. Okay. Anybody else who's directly affected by this issue? Okay. So then everybody else who we might recruit to our cause, I want to call them a potential ally, or they're our potential allies. So who might they be? Who is it who's not directly affected by the problem or the issue, but for some reason they might want to be on our side and join us and work with us?
Well, the lay publics, I mean, everyone in the public.
Uh-huh.
People like to get behind things that are right.
So that would be the lay public? Okay.
And you have people out there who like to get involved in stuff. I mean,
Okay, so some members of the public and some politicians might want to,
People get involved in things that are going to benefit them. I mean, they're always looking out for themselves.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, a politician who may give a leg up, or,
Mhm.
you know, someone who has some type of influence, you know, whether it be a president of a company who feels it might benefit him in some way.
okay, so there might be some business.
Yeah, I mean, it's basic human instinct. Whatever's good for them. I mean,
Okay, so there might be some business people who might want to join us for some reason, help our cause. Who else?
I hesitate to admit it, but, and probably cynically don't think it would be possible, but you did mention Citizens Action, and that might be.
Oh, a group? So a group like Citizen Action or other like, what, change type?
You're looking for.
Social change groups. Uh-huh. Who else?
Thinking perhaps in this instance, the medical community might.
Why might they want to do that?
For better treatments if you know the family history.
Mm-hmm. Right, and maybe organ transplants, right? Yeah. Okay. What other groups of people might want to support us? Okay. How about the American Civil Liberties Union? How about religious groups who might feel there's some moral reason? Or how about ethnic, certain kinds, you know, a number of different ethnic groups.
You've got
Ethnic
to
groups.
Hawaii because there's
Uh-huh.
a lot of issues like the American Indians for the Hawaiians in Hawaii.
Right, right.
And there's been a lot of adoptions where there's access to
Mhm.
how much Hawaiian a person might be,
Mhm.
or keeping them from homestead land, things like that. So we're getting tremendous support from our our Office of Hawaiian Affairs
Right.
people. And our governor's now Hawaiian, so we think that's great.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and let's take, for example, in the 60s, white adoption of black children was very common, and the black community rose up and said, that's cultural genocide, we want it to stop. And it tapered way off after that because there was that pressure. Well, now those folks are adults. Those adoptees are now adults. And it may well be that the black community might say, we want their ethnic heritage available to them. We want to know who they came, we want them to be able to know who they came from. So ethnic groups may support us as well. Are there others?
Well, you have the movie stars, some of them are real nice to help in the time.
Mhm.
There's a lot of things for them.
Get them publicity. They could get in the cause and get publicity and stuff like that. Yeah.
They're all taking on some kind of thing.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Isn't there an adoption agency here in Illinois that has catered to a lot of those private children, to a lot of famous
Mhm.
people?
Yeah, the Craig.
Oh, okay.
That
I've
was
heard
the-
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, so there are lots of different groups. There might be 100 more different groups we haven't even thought of yet that may want to support our issue for whatever their own reasons are, right? The religious community doesn't do it for the same reason that we do. They might do it because they think it's a moral thing to do, right? Where we think it's a practical thing or a personal need that we have, right? And the medical community has it for a very different reason. They want to be able to treat their patients more effectively.
I
Okay.
think the medical
Yeah.
community goes one step further, and there's now stuck in the middle of all this stuff, as having facilitated lots of adoptions.
Aha.
I think there's another issue
Uh-huh.
for the medical
Right,
community to look at.
right. Yeah, some of these folks might be our opponents. The same people, some of them might be our allies and some of them might be our opponents, right? We might have politicians who are allies and politicians who are opponents. The same with, lawyers. Some might be our allies, some might be our, civil liberties lawyers might support us. Adoption lawyers might oppose us. Some adoption lawyers might support us, I mean, it's all, but you just find who within those groups. So actually that gets us to some of these other questions here. It's valuable to ask what will these people gain if they win? Because so to go to them and say, support us because we want our heritage, or we want to know our kids, or we want to be able to have the information that we need to help our kids grow up better, that's not their concern. Their concern is, can we treat our patients better? Can we get publicity? Can we get votes? And that's how we need to pitch it to them. We certainly will say why we want it, but we also say, and if you support us, lots of Triad members will go and shop at your store, or we'll vote for you, right? Or we'll come to your church. Probably not. They don't want to recruit you to their church, but this is a way for you to express your moral commitment in the world about the lives of people who have been hurt by this system. So. Okay, and it's also good to know what risks are they taking. You might, like for example, if we ask the ACLU to do a suit for us, well, they might lose. They might raise a lot of money and do this suit and then lose, and then some of their funders might say, boy, they're really getting off into a lot of kooky stuff, these really esoteric issues, and they're not winning so many cases anymore, and I'm not going to give them any more money. Or, whatever. Or the medical community, their quote, fellow doctors might say, well, hey, I do adoptions and I make money off of this, and I don't want them out there fighting for this kind of stuff. I did bad stuff. I sold babies, and I don't want them uncovering that, and I'm not going to give them referrals, right? They're a specialist, and I'm not giving them any referrals, right? So they may be taking some risks in supporting us as well. It's good for us to know what those risks are and be ready to deal with that kind of stuff.
As an aside, our local ACLU in the Chicago area lost both CUDA members. There was a very hot issue about the Nazis marching in Skokie a few years ago.
Right, they
and
did lose a
they supported
lot
the
of
right of
members.
the Nazis to march through Skokie, and to say the least, it was controversial. And a lot of people just said, and I'm not a member anymore, put it that way.
Right.
And
Staff,
a lot of other people aren't.
right. A lot of their staff, a lot of their staff resigned. It was good because they didn't have as much money to pay people anymore. A lot of their members quit. Yeah.
It was a very, very heated, and this issue that we're discussing with certain individuals certainly is highly emotional.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if the ACLU was gun shy about that or not.
Okay, so then a next question here. Pardon me?
I don't think they're all that gun shy about anything. That's why they fall into these things.
Yeah.
So they lose half their membership.
Right, right. Okay, so another question, which I think is a very important one, is what power do they have? See, because that's what it takes to win on an issue is power, right? And each one has a different kind of power. They've got a power in, for example, the religious groups, have a power in numbers. I keep putting dollar signs. They actually do also have money. And they have a certain moral power, because if you get a bunch of like bishops and rabbis and people like that all speaking out for something, that gives us certain credibility, right? The same thing with medical, people, doctors, they know something, right? And lawyers and stuff like that. Business people have money. Politicians, have a certain kind of clout and they can vote for you. Even if, say for example, you're working on a state level, if you can get your local, your U.S. senator to support you, they can't vote on it. But you know the kind of wheeling and dealing that goes on, right? Hey, look, my constituents want this, and I think this is important. And I supported you in your last election, state representative so and so from Podunk, and if you want my support again, you want some of my campaign slush funds, get on board with this thing. What's the matter with you, right? That kind of stuff. So each different group has a different kind of power, and it's good for us to know what that power is.
We learned very quickly in Hawaii, primarily who are not our allies, but our opponents who wielded power. And in Hawaii, it boiled down to very few people on both sides.
That's right.
It was adoption lawyers and our ex-family court judge, who was an ex-adoption lawyer, and a adoptee who was the wife of a state House of Representatives who opposed our bill tremendously, who carried incredible amount of weight. And on the people, and we'll get to that, about who has the power to do something, the people who make the decisions are very key. And
That's
all
right.
that energy that we put into talking to lots and lots of people, most of it was useless.
Yeah, swing votes are definitely helpful, but you got to get the leadership in the legislatures to do what you want them to do, or you can't possibly
But
win.
again, we had 50 people showing up at hearing, and the person that they listened to, even though he carried a very neutral message, was our current head family court judge, who was supportive of our bill.
Yeah, because he has a certain amount of credibility because of his position.
Birth parents and adoptive parents and adoptees carried very little weight.
Okay, and the last question here is the question of which groups are these folks organized into. Now, some of them it's real clear, but like, for example, if you go to a religious body and you want to get their support, do you go, in certain churches you go to the minister. In other churches you go to the social action committee, right? It depends. It depends. In ethnic groups, right? Like, let's say you want to get black community support. Well, the NAACP, if you're doing a legal case, they may be very interested in that, but not so interested maybe in lobbying. Whereas if you went to the Rainbow Coalition or something, they might be more interested in the lobbying side of things, the legislative side.
In Chicago, you go straight to the mouth, Jesse Jackson.
And that reminds me too that somebody like the mayor, right? The mayor of Chicago, a very powerful person, can't vote on open records, right? But has a lot of influence over a lot of state representatives and a lot of senators. So, okay. So
Just for
that's
a piece of information, Mayor Daley, the son, who is now our mayor, was in fact the first sponsor of the bill. We had it, the very first bill in Illinois.
Oh.
And ultimately, yes, he was, and it's very unknown because he ultimately had to back out of it and get someone else because his secretary's like mother or somebody real close to his, like what he would think of as his extended family, was an adopted parent and was just becoming hysterical and unglued because records would be open. So, but he was our original sponsor.
Wow.
Thanks to Pat Murphy's contact with him.
Well, does he still have the same secretary in his employ?
Well, he wouldn't make a statement at this point on it. I mean, what he feels personally.
Well, we wouldn't necessarily have to make a statement, but what if we just muscled some of the senators and
Yeah, well, he did do that for
legislators?
us years ago, but at this point, I don't know. We don't ask him any favors like that anymore. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Yeah, so let's see if there's any other questions and or comments about the whole subject of constituencies, members or allies, before we go on. Anything? Okay, so let's take targets. So, and again, what I'm talking about here is an individual, or what Midwest Academy usually refers to as the primary target. It's an individual who has the power to give you what you want, and who you have some power over, or you hope to be able to gain some power over. So, so what am I asking here? So who has the power to give us what we want?
Your local state legislator is the key person.
Committee chairs.
First, you've got to start with the legislator who represents you, the district you live in. Because you're going to be a voter. And that's what it is.
It seemed to me that you
Right.
just have to get someone to sponsor a bill.
So one of those people you got to get to be your sponsor.
Well, now, there you may want to go to your committee chair, or your more influential member on the committee. But the first step is to talk your local legislator into
Right.
and do it,
Right.
or trying to.
Yeah. So like, okay, you're talking about now the committee chair, right? So when the bill gets, so once that you get yourself a sponsor, so you got some member of the legislature who's your target, and you get them to sponsor the bill, right? So then the bill goes into committee, and then the committee chair becomes the sponsor, right? But in a certain sense, now it's interesting because for the whole group, the committee chair is going to be the sponsor, but really, I mean the target. But really, for each individual member of the group is going to have their own individual target, right? They want to get their local person. I mean, I certainly wrote to my guy, my state rep. He's got no power. He's not chair of any committee, but I want his vote, right? And he's going to respond to me. I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me right back, and he said, absolutely, I'll vote for your bill. And I bet he will, too. So, okay, so let's say now you pass it in committee. So then who does your target become?
Everybody has to vote on it.
Okay, so that's all the state legislators. But if you were going to pick one individual, who would that be?
Your whip.
The majority of them, yeah.
And if it were me doing it, which is the way we did it, we went from the top down.
Uh-huh.
Because the top person, the top person
Knows the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities of everybody that he's dealing with. He also knows who's the adopted parent. I mean, they were just a tremendous source of information to us.
Okay, so it might be the majority whip, it might be the majority leader, the terms vary from state to state, or actually the power may vary. Like somebody might be a figurehead, but somebody else is really the power person, right? Or it might be, somebody might have the title of the Speaker of the House, or they might be the President of the Senate. But what I'm suggesting is that you pick an individual who has, more than anybody else at that moment, the power to give you what you want, which is to move the bill forward. Now, this doesn't just apply to legislation. It's also true if you want to get a certain agency to change. In Philadelphia, for example, we had Catholic Social Services, and they were terrible. They were terrible. They made these two, a birth mother and a daughter, wanted to meet each other. I mean, one of them had initiated it, but the other one was glad, and they wanted to meet each other, and they put them through hell. They had them send letters back and forth, which they censored. And then when they came in, they made them pray in separate rooms before they got to meet. Really? And they asked the daughter if her children had been baptized in the Catholic faith, and she said no. And they said, you have to promise to baptize your children in the Catholic faith before you can meet your birth mother. And then she had to sit there and promise that she would baptize her children, right? And they did. And the nun sat there with them and told them in advance, you can't tell each other your last names or your telephone numbers, right? You cannot do it. I mean, they did this kind of stuff. And so we wanted to change that agency policy. And we weren't organized enough, and it turned out that we
How
were...
about an automatic weapon?
Well, that's another approach, but you get certain side consequences.
Hearing stories like that is tempting.
Activism at its peak.
See, yeah, the trouble is, the trouble is then they just replace the person, and then everybody in the world hates you, so then you lose, right? So,
Not everybody.
yeah, you feel,
As you sit in Burlington.
right.
There are agencies, however, in government who might be significant,
Mhm.
such as the head of the Department of Public Health or their legislative liaison from that body. If you can talk them into supporting the bill, they have a certain amount of credibility, administration,
Right.
support,
Right.
et cetera,
Right.
so that you can get sometimes bipartisan support.
Right.
Here in Illinois, it's the Department of Children and Family
That's
Services.
Mhm.
And
Right.
if you get the Department of Children and Family Services, you can therefore be the
Right. And that's, in a legislative campaign, that is your ultimate target, right? Your final target is the governor. After you get everything else, then you got to get the governor to sign it.
In Hawaii, the governor really doesn't, I mean, of course, he has veto rights over everything. But because of where our bill sits at a judiciary, and because he's an executive and that's in judiciary, basically, he won't, it doesn't matter, as long as there's no technical problem, he doesn't really have much say in it.
But he could veto it, right?
He can veto anything.
Yeah.
The issue is that basically, he doesn't touch anything that falls, he doesn't even look at anything that doesn't fall within his executive realm.
But he can if he wants to.
Certainly.
Right, see, and you have to just make sure,
We just happen to have a system that once it goes to committee chair, and you talk to the leader, and the leader says, oh, whatever the committee chair tells me, that's what I'm going to support. That was it. We just had to go through our committee chairs and get it passed, and at that
Right.
point, they have enough power. And we had every social service agency in the state against us.
Wow.
We didn't want it. They all said, your intent is good, but we don't want this to happen.
right.
But yeah, it does boil down to, and all these people, of course, as you go along, can veto it. But each state, as you said, has some sort of system. In our state, the committee chair carries the overwhelming weight all the way up through to the governor.
Yeah, one of the main points here I want to make is that it's not the legislature who's the target, and it's not the agency, because the agency can't do anything for you. You have to find somebody in that agency, usually the director or the president of the board or the chair of the board, and that make them the target, because they're in that position because they have a certain amount of authority over other people in that organization, and they can tend to make them do what they want. A very rare example was in California just now. They got the bill to pass, the Open Records bill to pass in the House Judiciary Committee over the objection of the chair. It's very rare. It's very rare. But in this case, they found out they just could not move the chair, and then they went on and picked out swing votes and targeted them. So, and yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I would also add to that list very large corporations as your target areas because, and sometimes in the newspaper, whenever they're identified as an adopted parent or this or some category, we have a famous file. We call it famous person file. And we go back to that because there's this, you're always being identified in some category. We will go to that company and we know if they did something with children or something like that, maybe they'll at least listen to us. And then the big companies like Motorola and CNA and that, they have their own lobby.
Right.
Lobbyists,
Right.
and maybe they will then align you with them.
Yeah, that's unlikely, though, in terms of this particular issue.
But it worked for us.
Well, I'm just trying to think, particularizing with my company.
Oh,
And we're
understand.
currently having a problem because we support United Way,
Yeah.
which supports Planned Parenthood.
Yeah.
And we've made the blacklist now, published blacklist of most of the anti-abortion groups because we support abortion. Why? Because we support United Way, we support Planned Parenthood. So that leads a major company to say, if it doesn't deal with bread and butter issues that we're interested in, or the general community service that we like to image, pro-family or pro-whatever we want, then we prefer to stay out of the issue. You only have a certain amount of chips.
Well, your
Right,
advantage is when someone on their board is an adoptee.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's wonderful, everything gels,
Yeah, so then the next question, so once you figure out who your target is, whoever that individual is at a particular moment, then the question is, what power do you have over that person? Is it votes? Is it press? What is it, right? That's, right, right. I mean, people use that kind of stuff. But you just need to figure out what power do you have. Well, that's the Jane Russell theory of legislative change, right?
Illinois legislature works.
Right.
It's
Okay.
disgusting.
But at any rate, that's what you need to figure out is what power do you have over that person. And just to give an example, oh, you'll love this, John. This is a citizen action example. What was the one that they told me? It was a utility company, because utility companies, since they're regulated, the public, well, anyway, they often will have a board member who is really there for window dressing purposes. It'll be like a college president or a movie star or some well-renowned social do-gooder. Right, right, that's right. Many do, and especially utilities. And the thing is that that person isn't in it for the same reasons that everybody else is in it. They're not there because, you know, they're these greedy, pardon me, but they're these greedy folks who are on corporate boards and, you know, they want to make all this money and stuff like that. They're like, they see it as a way of doing some public good, right? Well, let's take the National Committee for Adoption, for example. Patti LaBelle. Does anybody not know who Patti LaBelle is? Okay. She's a singer. And she's on there for window dressing purposes. She's not an adoption expert or anything like that. She's on there for window dressing purposes. And she's done a lot of good things in the black community, and that's why she's on that board. Well, she's from Philadelphia. And we keep talking in Philadelphia about, we got to go talk to Patti LaBelle about that National Committee for Adoption, because she can be vulnerable, right, around that issue. Just like, oh, I'm trying to think, what was the, okay, here's the example. There was a rent strike that a citizen action group was organizing. And a woman who was a leader of this tenant group who was blind, she was behind, she and her family were behind in their utility payments, and just at the same time that this rent strike was heating up, the gas company shut off her gas. And she had no heat, and she couldn't cook, and they couldn't heat water, and all this kind of stuff, right? And so they said, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And what the researcher for Citizen Action did was looked at the board membership, and found out that one of the board members of the gas company was the director or president or something for some big association for services to the blind. So she just called him up on the phone and said, I understand that, you know, you're all about helping blind people. Well, how come you just had my gas shut off? See, and you wouldn't want me to have to call the newspapers and talk about how that's what she said, how you're, you know, making life hard for poor blind people, right? And in an hour and a half, her gas was turned back on again. And that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you got to, see, it's not always money and votes. It might be press. Pardon me?
It's a threat and influence.
Yeah, or an ultimatum. You know, it's an ultimatum, right? You know.
That is what the power that we carry. People went into our sessions and our hearings saying, I'm a voter in the state of Hawaii, and I have the power to vote for you or against you. And what you do on this bill will help determine whether I vote for you or against you. Mm-hmm. And we also got tremendous press. Mm-hmm. And what our legislators wanted to see was press that would be beneficial to them.
Right. And if you can target it right on the person and say, Senator so-and-so is the head of this committee, and you know, the lives and well-being and emotional health of adoptees and birth parents and adoptive parents is in the hands of not just the we want the legislature, but in the hands of Senator so-and-so. And today, he or she, they're going to decide, you know, the fate of all the, you know, I mean, focus it right on that person. So there's a lot of different ways, you know, and all of these different kinds of groups can have a different kind of power. For example, we had, I'm still thinking of press again, but we were trying to get a certain job security bill through the legislature, not my adoption group, but another group I work with, through the legislature in Pennsylvania. And one day, what we did was a vigil outside the door of the chair of the committee, in the hallway in the state capitol building. It had never been done before. It just like flipped everybody out. We got incredible press. It was a Republican person who we were targeting, so the Democrats loved us. Use our Xerox machines, use our phones, use our desks, right? You know, it had been the other way around. The Republicans would have said, oh, use our Xerox machines. At any rate, what happened was, one day we had Children's Day, and we had all these children there, and here's this young girl holding up a little baby and saying, you know, the senator would walk by and she'd say, you know, is this baby going to have a job when he grows up? It's all up to you, Senator, and the cameras are filming this. And the next day was Religious Day, and we had 3 bishops standing in front of his office door holding bread. And it was just, oh God, the pressure was incredible. The guy never, amazingly enough, the guy never caved in. But the point is that each of these different groups have a different, maybe that person belongs to a particular religious congregation, and the minister can have a private chat with the person, right? Or somebody on the board of rectors, or whatever the name of those groups are, deacons or something.
Closet birth fathers in the legislature.
Yes.
Yeah, you never know.
That's correct.
You never know. You
But
never
we
know.
also had resistance from adoptive parents in the legislature.
But these closet birth fathers, though, may not have a whole lot to fear, because frequently they're not named on the birth certificate. And frequently the mother will not say who the father is anyway, so although they're probably panicked, you probably can't convince them of it, but I would
Right.
tend to say that they
Right.
probably have little to fear.
Yeah, but they may still fear things,
Oh, I'm sure.
even though they don't have a many of our fears are not very rational, People who don't want to come out of the closet about their triad position, fears aren't rational, what's going to happen to you, but.
Particularly if they're high legislators or in a high-profile position, sure.
Okay, so now let's take, that's what the Midwest Academy usually calls a primary. These are the primary targets. So now I want to talk about a secondary target. And that's somebody who, let's say you have so little power over this person you can't even get a meeting with them. Well, if you can't get a meeting with them, you're probably not going to have much chance of influencing them. So now the next question is, who else is there in the world, this is going to be a pain, who else is there in the world who has influence over that person who you have some influence over?
Spouse.
It might be a spouse. Could be a spouse, right? And this is where these...
Start with campaign managers, for example, we find agencies, not directly but indirectly, doing specific work for specific legislators. They could be a neighbor, they could be a helping buddy.
People who do campaign finance, and they do control the businesses, the president.
Others?
Speaker of a house who may have power over a committee chair who may have power over your local legislators.
So, yeah, so it's... Okay,
One
so...
step up from wherever you want to be.
Yeah.
Or
Staff. Right.
What position the legislature
Right.
is going to take.
Somebody's minister, somebody's doctor, somebody's lawyer, the person's, right? This is where these window dressing corporate people, I mean, they're not really, the window dressing person can't make the decision. It's the chair of the board that makes the decision more than anybody, right? But if one of the board members starts squawking, see, then that board member has a certain power over the chair, right? So, and let me give you any more examples people come up with? Let me give you a couple of examples. One of them was, the group 9 to 5, the Working Women's Union. When they wanted to get organized, the first thing they wanted to do is put themselves on the map with the members show themselves as being an influential group. It was like a half a dozen women who worked in the same office or the same building, and in Chicago. And so they said, well, now if we could get some kind of a victory over the Chamber of Commerce, then that would put us on the map, and lots of people would want to join us, and then we would really be big and powerful rather than just doing it with smoke and mirrors, right? Because that's what a lot of this stuff is at the beginning, is smoke and mirrors. So what they said was, okay, so here's what we want. The federal law says that you can't discriminate against people in employment based on race or sex. So here's what we'll do. We want the president of the Chamber of Commerce, because it's their responsibility to inform all the members of the Chamber of Commerce what various laws are as pertains to their business. We want the chair of the Chamber of Commerce to send out a letter to all of the members of the Chamber of Commerce saying, just advising them that the federal law requires that they not discriminate in employment based on race or sex. Well, they couldn't even get a meeting with the chair of the Chamber of Commerce. Wouldn't even bother with this little group of half a dozen women who had their own little upstart union, right? So then, so they said, well, who can we think of who has power over the chair of the Chamber of Commerce? Well, they all went to lunch together every day at a particular deli, And the owner of the deli was a member of the Chamber of Commerce. The sticker was right there in the window. So one day they went in to eat, and they got in the line, and they just started squawking about employment discrimination and how the Chamber of Commerce isn't doing anything about it all over the city, and why isn't he, as a member of the Chamber, complaining to the board of the Chamber of Commerce that they should do something about this, and they're all loyal customers of his, and they're like raising a ruckus in the restaurant, right? And he gets right on the horn to the chair. He's got access to the chair of the Chamber of Commerce. He's a member. Calls the guy right up on the phone and said, look, you're supposed to be protecting me from political heat, and my membership in the Chamber of Commerce is giving me a political problem right now, and I want you to solve it. And he says, what do you want me to do? And he turns to him, what do you want him to do? And meet with us. Okay, meet with him. All right, I'll meet with him. Because you can't be letting it get around that your members all want to leave you because you're doing just the opposite. You're giving them political problems rather than solving them for them, right? So of course he met with them. And they said, we want you to send out this letter. Well, he didn't care. What's skin off of his nose to send out a letter like that? If he didn't, they could release a press release saying that he refused to do it, and that would make him look bad. So they did that, and he sent out the letter, and then everybody said, whoa, look what 9 to 5 did. They got the Chamber of Commerce to send out this letter. So this was an example of how they used a secondary target to get a meeting with the primary target and get what they want, get what they wanted done.
A thought occurs to me, which, when you were talking about the women going to this restaurant and so forth, it occurred to me that many people, although I see more men here now, and I think more men are becoming active in the adoption movement, it tends for a long time to be a movement where women were more active. And equal rights and all that notwithstanding, what have you got? A bunch of women standing in and they're just women and just a bunch of housewives, and that's the way some people view it. I think this is a certain problem that might have to be overcome.
Yeah, if that is in fact a problem, then that's where the whole question of membership and allies come in, right? If the movement really needs more men, we need to recruit them. If we need more organizations to be our allies that have more men in them, we need to go recruit them.
Or drag your significant other.
Right,
If
that's
you're
right.
female, hopefully is a male.
Right, right. Well, whatever. I mean, it could be husbands of birth mothers for open records, right? We could have a whole new group.
Yeah.
Husbands and sons of birth mothers for open records. I mean, there's all kinds of groups we can organize. Okay, now I want to talk about opposition. Just to give you an example, in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Catholic Conference is our major opposition. And I mean, there's a couple legislators who are like pushing their legislative program, but really, as I understand it, the power comes from them. And the truth of the matter is that the Adoption Forum, even with its entire mailing list of 500 people, and the other couple of groups in Pennsylvania, we can't beat them. We can't beat them. All they have to do is just list every month in their legislative newsletter the list of bills that they oppose and have that be one of them, and we can't win. We got it out of a committee, but that's because we got this really strongly pro-choice committee chair who's always looking for some way to give the Catholics a kick in the butt, right? But when it comes to the full House and the full Senate, we can't win. We can't, unless we find some way to neutralize their opposition. So you have to figure out who is your opposition, are they organized, what kind of power do they have, and is there some way that you can neutralize them?
This marks the end of Session 2, Tape 1. Now turn to Session 2, Tape 2.
And let me just give you an example. This is another Chamber of Commerce example, but mercifully it's not one that has anything to do with citizen action. This one was in Pennsylvania. This bill I remember I mentioned we were trying to get, and we were targeting this. Was that the bill? No, it was a different bill. I used to work for a group called the Jobs of Peace Campaign, and we were looking for all these kinds of industrial job security stuff. Anyway, we had this bill, and we wanted to get the bill in, and we went and talked to the committee chair who was on our side, and he said, yeah, I'm all for the bill, but I'm not willing to hold hearings on it or push the bill or anything, because I'm sure that the bill, the way it's written now, the Chamber of Commerce is going to oppose it, and all they have to do is just tell their members they're opposed, and the legislature will get 10,000 letters, and you'll be crushed. And I'll have put 200 hours of my and my staff's time into this, and I'm not willing to do that on a losing proposition. So we said, but I'm for you, right? But he says, but I'm not willing to waste 200 hours on a losing proposition. So we said, okay, we'll negotiate with the Chamber of Commerce. We said, fine, if you can negotiate with them and get them to sign off on the bill, I'll be glad to push it. We negotiated with them. They said, there's this one section of the bill that we can't live with. You take that section out of the bill, we don't have a problem with it. So we had to go back to our allies, right, all the labor unions and the religious groups and the community groups and say, you know, the situation with the committee chair and the situation with the chamber, and they say they'll sign off if we take this part out. And people reluctantly said, oh, okay, well, that makes the bill less effective, but it's still something. It's sort of like, okay, we're getting something like the Hawaii bill. We'll still get a good step, and maybe we can win on this other part later. So we did. We took that part out of the bill. We went to hearing. The chair of the AFL-CIO, the president of the AFL-CIO in Pennsylvania got up, and he testified first, and this bill's great, and blah, blah, blah. And then the lobbyists, not the lobbyists not the regular on-staff lobbyist who we negotiated with from the chamber. He was there, but he didn't speak. This lawyer that they hired from outside came in, this hired gun came in to speak for them, and he got up and said, the Chamber of Commerce is unalterably opposed to this bill in any form. We had been stabbed in the back. And so we said, now what can we do now, right? Because we couldn't win with them being opposed to it. So we said, what are we going to do now? So what we did was, see, they don't care what labor thinks. Chamber already knows that labor hates them, and you know, the public knows that labor hates them. So like if we had like a labor demonstration in front of the Chamber of Commerce, that wouldn't bother anybody. But the Chamber, where's the support, the ideological support come from for the Chamber of Commerce? It comes from white middle-class people. Well, what's the peace movement? White middle-class people. And this bill provided job security for industrial workers both in civilian occupations and in military occupations. Maybe it's a little complicated, but unless there's some sort of a job security plan in a military facility, then all the workers want more money spent on the military, so they think that's their way of having job security. So people in the peace movement in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, we went to them and we said, we want a peace demonstration in front of the Chamber of Commerce to protest the fact that they're opposing this job security for these workers, including these military workers. And they said, great, we'll do it, right? We had 25 people lined up, and we had a TV station lined up, and we had all the signs all made, and we called the Chamber of Commerce lobbyist who we'd negotiated with in the first place, and we said, we're going to picket you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And he said, let's talk about the language in the bill. And they agreed to two tiny little, I consider them to be face-saving phrase changes in writing this time. That was our mistake. We didn't get it in writing. And then they signed off. They gave us a letter saying to the chair of the committee, based on these two changes in the bill, the Chamber of Commerce is taking a neutral position on the bill. We will not, we will not support or oppose this bill. So then, and when we got a unanimous vote in the committee, all the Democrats and all the Republicans voted for the bill because we were for it and nobody was against it. So that's a way of neutralizing the opposition. Figure out who they are, what's their vulnerability, and then how can you neutralize them.
Well, and sometimes I just was involved in legislative strategy involving a bill actually I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared on the surface that we would be opposed by trial lawyers. There were significant elements of it.
Mm-hmm.
We, not me this time, but my superior, went to Leonard Ring and some key lawyers, well-known lawyers.
Uh-huh.
This is what we mean by this bill. It doesn't really impact on you, on your practice, and it just cool it a little bit and not oppose it because we don't mean anything by it but so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
And they said fine.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, and they lived up to their word. Unfortunately, we had some other problems, but and other opposition.
Yeah.
That's one way.
Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Leadership and the opposition and find out where they really stand.
Right.
So they don't have a knee-jerk reaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, try to persuade them. Absolutely. I mean,
That goes with your social welfare.
whoever it is that you're trying to influence, got to talk to them. Got to talk to them. Okay, we're running short on time. So let me just see if there's any other questions or comments about targets. Primary, secondary, opposition. Okay, so now let's talk about tactics. So the point I want to make now is that it's based on, it's too bad all this stuff doesn't flow very well, but it does on the sheet. So what I want to suggest is that now is the time, once you go through all of the strategic thinking, and what I want to do is encourage people here to go back to your group, sit down with your members, and actually go through this process. What are your goals? What's a victory? You know, what kind of resources do we have? What kind of resources could we gain in a campaign? Who are our members? Who could we get? Who could our allies be? Who are the targets? And then based on all of that, now what tactics can we use and can we encourage our allies to use that will, that will best apply our power and their power to whoever the target happens to be at the moment. And all I want to say about it is that just a list of criteria here for selecting targets. They need to be in context. In other words, they need to fit with all of this stuff that we talked about before, all this strategic thinking. It's valuable for them to be flexible and creative. See, like, for example, flexibility is very important. And I think it was a creative idea on our part to get the peace movement to go protest the chamber. But then, once they agreed to it in writing, we called off the demonstration. We didn't want to demonstrate. We wanted their neutrality, right? We didn't want to, who cares if we get on TV? We wanted to win, right? So you need to be flexible and change. If they're willing to negotiate, you got to negotiate. Again, directed at a specific target. It has to make sense to the members. If you say, we're all going to go, take our clothes off in front of the such and such an agency and say, see, we came into the world in our birthday suits and we had, I don't know, whatever, some kooky notion. I mean, the point is if the tactic doesn't make sense to the members are not going to do it. So it's got to be something that is within the frame of reference of the membership. And each tactic has to be backed up by a specific form of power, whether that's money or votes or publicity or personal influence or whatever, reputation or whatever that is. And then again, each different group, your group and each of these other different ally groups, all might be wanting to do different tactics because those might, maybe the ACLU will file a suit in court and the doctors will have a press conference and you get your politician, to introduce the bill and the business people, talk about time. Maybe they get the chamber to issue a statement about all this lost time off because people have all these psychological difficulties because they don't know who the hell they are, where their kids are, or whatever, whatever it is, whatever specific kind of power they've got, they should use that power in whatever tactic is best suited to that. So I guess that's the end. And I want to ask, but I do want to do this evaluation before we go. But let's just, any other questions, any questions or comments about tactics? Or anything we've covered in the last almost 2 hours? Don't have to have any, it's all right.
A major part of all this that is kind of, we talked about it at almost every point, is the media, the power that the media has, and really be able to focus that power.
Right. Yeah, media is certainly as powerful as money and votes. It's tremendously powerful. So let's have anybody not signed the sign-in sheet. There are 3 copies of that around. There is still this copy of the manual. Thanks. Yeah. Once they're filled, if you could. Oh, no, I'm going to do that on the board right now.
Oh.
Yeah. And also on the subject of tactics, by the way, there are hundreds of possible tactics. There's a guy named Gene Sharp. His book is listed in the conference brochure as suggested readings for the workshop here. He did a book called, big thick thing, called The Politics of Nonviolent Action. He found 198 different tactics that groups have used in history to do social change. Right, these are not the politics of nonviolent action. And there's about 25 of them listed in the manual here that might be a good sort of start, of thinking for people on that. Okay, the other thing I want to just mention is that, before we do the evaluation, the last comment is that I'll go anywhere and do anything for this issue. I mean, spent 20 years as an activist, and last year I found out that there was an adoption reform movement. And I said, well, that's what I've been doing this stuff for 20 years, was to get ready for this. So anybody who wants me to go anywhere, come back to Chicago, go to Hawaii, go to Rhode Island or Missouri or anywhere, do workshops, you know, do organizing, Michigan, just let me know and I'll be glad to come.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
And what's your occupation? Are you independently wealthy, or, I mean, do you say, well, I'll go anywhere and do it, I mean, or do you have to go to work like 9 to 5 every day?
Well, no, I have a flexible work schedule. I work in the evenings a lot because I work for this anti-drug group. I'll say for just a moment and then we'll just.
Are you like a professional organizer?
I'm a community organizer. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I don't want to say anything badly about Citizens Action, but I did. But I would like to make one comment about that, because they lose a tremendous amount of credibility, and something that I would suggest that we would never do, and that is, got to tell the truth. You've got to be 100% honest. You can't get a reputation for distorting figures or using selective data. You've got to tell it like it is. You have to, because what you have really, even when you have a single target, you're probably not going to get it right away. You've got to develop some kind of a long-term, a relatively long-term relationship with legislatures, with the media. You've got to tell the truth.
And you got to keep your word. Your
That's
word
right.
is gold. If you give it,
Absolutely.
don't ever go back.
And expect the politician to say, he's going to vote for your bill. He's darn well going to vote for the bill. You tell him, I'm going to see whether you vote for the bill. I'm going to check back with you to make sure that you voted for the bill, et cetera.
Yeah, I want to say I agree with you 100% on that. I think what our goal is honesty. I mean, we did this march last year from New York to Washington. I went from New York to Philadelphia. And the theme of the march was honesty and an openness in adoption laws, or honesty.
That's what this whole movement is about.
Right.
It's to dump secrecy and shame and all this other
Right.
crap and get
Right.
honest and
Right.
truthful.
Right.
And so the basic thing that we're all operating, the premise that we are operating on, and that all of this comes from, is truth. And if we can't do that in our movement,
That's
and
right.
within this group,
That's right.
we're in deep
Absolutely.
shit.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's absolutely obligatory that we be honest in what we do. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so just a moment here for evaluation, and we're all done. So what I want to do first of all is ask folks, what was good about this workshop? What was valuable to you about the last 2 hours we spent?
All participation.
Participation. What else?
I think working through the process.
I don't know if you'd call them ideas or tactics, just approaches that I had never thought of before, the sideways approaches, the other ways of doing it. Plans B and C. And D and
Okay.
E.
Okay. Other things that were good? Okay. What are things that could be improved about this workshop in the future?
Be a little more aggressive movement through the material.
Okay, so it's moving more expeditiously through the agenda.
You
Is that
can
it?
bust us along.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Oh, really? I was about to say more time.
Okay.
More time for the workshop.
More time. Okay.
Allotted 2 hours, I think.
Okay. Other things that could be improved? Okay. Any other good things?
Good leader. I think you have a good leader.
It's going to be very helpful to me. I'm not sure what I ought to say. Repeat the same things that we've gone over, because I plan to do so, or start off a whole different tactic when I give my presentation, because you did such a good job.
Okay. Well, maybe an entirely different audience. So.
Well, that's what.
Yeah.
Don't anybody come.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Oh, yeah, I get some.
Okay. Okay. Thank you all very much for coming and being a part of this.